Hi there, Kris here with another installment in our Highlight Everything series. In this video, we're going to be looking at highlighting gold. And so to serve as our example in this video, we'll be highlighting the weapon on this Dark Eldar Scourge. And so the gold will be a nice complement to those turquoise highlights on them. And to get us started, we'll be using Balthazar Gold, or whatever dark gold paint you have on hand, work just as fine. And to thin it down a little bit, we'll use some Vallejo acrylic thinner, but you could also use any other number of acrylic thinners or acrylic mediums. Now, I prefer to use these acrylic mediums rather than water to thin the paint down a bit, as when you use water, I find that the metallic pigment tends to separate from the medium and it gets really kind of funny. And so, whereas when we use our acrylic medium, the pigment stays suspended how it properly should be. It just becomes a little thinner state. And because we're working on top of a black primer, we will have to apply more than one coat. But because we're working in such a thin nature on the paint, that it'll be a nice metallic shine. And the thing with the metallics is that when you do thin it down, and I do recommend you thin them down when you're applying your base coat, because getting a much smoother finish on the metallics is a far better option rather than just laying one heavy clump onto the model, essentially because when we get to the highlighting phase, those brush strokes will show through and it just looks rather messy, and we don't want that. And so you see I just go over a couple of areas a couple times there just to make sure all the paint is nice and even on the model. And so next, we're going to come in with some Agrax Earthshade. Now, I use this one instead of Nuln Oil. You could also use the flesh tones as well. They can also give you a nice rich brown. But essentially, the reason for it is to get a nice brown tone. Use a bit of the brown qualities in this to tint the surface, but also because it's dark enough to get into the crevices and such. And so creating those nice deep shadows. You can see here, we're just letting it pool up a little closer to those little stones. Now, I've left the main part of the barrel separate just so that we can see how it looks without an ink shade. And also, I'm going to be for the highlighting, I will be dry brushing the barrel as opposed to the rest of the gun, where I'm going to layer the highlights on, just so that you can see how both techniques sit side by side, kind of thing. So you get kind of a 2-for-1 show here. And so next, we're going to start a highlighting process with Gehenna Gold. Gehenna? Whatever it is. And so again, we're going to thin it down just a little bit of thinner. It's roughly a 1-to-1 mixture. The previous, when we did the base coat, I believe it was more of closer to a 2-to-1. And that was just so that we get a nice thin paint. And so with this highlight, of course, when we're layering the highlights on, we do want the paint in a fairly thin state, but we don't want, like, again, when we thin our metallics down, it tends to separate the pigment from the medium, and so you get very inconsistent brush strokes when you're working with the paint in such a fashion. And so, now it's not integral that you have the acrylic medium, but to save yourself a bit of pain, I do recommend you get your hands on some. You can either use the GW, Vallejo, Reaper, or even Liquitex sells acrylic medium and such. And so, yeah. And so you can see here, we're just layering the highlights on. We're doing edge highlighting on this thing. And so we're on the big armor plate, we're highlighting the bottom edge. And then for like the little techno doodads underneath that, we're just doing a really quick kind of highlighting in the main body sections and just catching the top edges of like the ribs and the handles and such. And so you can see there, we're just doing the body, some of the little techno doodads, the little can't remember what, the counterweight or something like that, it's under the barrel. And then the tip of the gun, we're also highlighting the brightest point at the very tip of the barrel. And so it's really kind of, where you pick your highlights to go. And we could have gone back over with the Balthazar Gold to really begin the highlighting process, but when we're working with metallics, it's not too big a deal to see those kind of jumps. If you're really concerned about that, you could have went in with that Balthazar gold first. And so you can see here, we're going to start dry brushing the barrel with the Ghana gold. And because there was no shade on it, now again, we could have put the shade on there, but I'm just giving you both a visual of how it looks with both, like the gold with the shade and without the shade. And so, you know, you can see for yourselves which you kind of prefer, or, you know, or even like on the weapon, you know, it kind of makes the weapon's components separate from each other, yet still feeling unified. And so you may want to give it a shot yourself. Well, when working with metallics, I do actually prefer dry brushing, just because you can get those color transitions happening with dry brushing rather than simply layering it on. When you layer, you kind of have to want to apply more layers, create more colors between, you know, you create your gradients. Whereas when you dry brush, especially on metallics, it works really nice, and you can just kind of go to town and create those blends. As long as you keep working it, you're consistent where you're working your highlight to. And so for that barrel, I'm just lightly catching the edge closest to the hands, but then I'm creating more of a highlight closer to where those I don't know if those are vents or, you know what I mean. I don't know. And so next, our next highlight is Arc Armor Gold. And we're not going to be thinning this down. Oh, we are going to thin it down. Right, because we're going to layer it in. Not even sure what I was doing there. But yeah, we're going to thin it down. And just quickly drop some to the brush. And then again, this is because we're layering on these highlights. Again, we don't have to apply too much onto the model. And this gold will show quite brightly. And so you can see we're just catching some of those little areas, the doodads on the barrels. You know, and again, we're because the gun, we're working the brightest highlights to the end of the barrel. We could have just as easily worked the highlights the opposite direction on those points, but, you know, just for effect and just to maintain consistency, we're working with those colors that way. And so again, you can see when we're applying these highlights that it's really kind of just picking and choosing where we're going. For the grills and such, it's kind of like a dry brushing, really, to catch those top edges and, you know, the little doodads, we're just catching the top points. The armor plate that sits on top, we're just catching the very bottom edge and just bringing it up just a little bit. It's not a whole lot of highlighting. We're just catching those edges, making it all look nice and bright and shiny. Lots of fun. For the little stones, we're just going to highlight the front end of them. I don't know if they're stones or, you know, like little gemstone shapes. I don't know. Could have painted them like gemstones, but the whole gun's going to be gold. So you can see we just continue our work around, and basically we're just catching just the top edges and top corners, or the very corners of parts. So this really is not a whole lot of paint going on here. But again, because since we're accentuating those very corner details and such, it creates a really nice strong contrast, because those bright edges are typically closer to where we had applied the Agrax Earth shade, and so it is you get that really nice bright edge with that dark shadow, and it's that really nice strong contrast that looks really good. It looks like you spent tons of time painting this, when in fact all we've done is simply layered on these little highlights and basically having fun. So once we're happy with how these little layers go on, all over the place. Now again, because the paint is slightly thinned down, we do have to touch them once or twice in those areas. But then we break out the small dry brush again, and we draw some paint into the brush, wipe off the excess, and then we begin our dry brushing. And again, with this, we are not going as far as we had done previously. And it's really kind of tricky when you're working with like really delicate pieces like this. So you kind of have to, you know, touch the model and, you know, keep it so it doesn't kind of flutter around on you. But again, you know, it's just quickly catch some of those edges. And you can see how when I'm dry brushing there, I'm going like against the grain, and I'm drawing the color inward from the edge, just so that most of that edge is catching all that gold paint. And that creates that nice sharp edge there. But also because we dry brush into the model a bit, it creates a color blend as well. And so And that is about it. And you can see how the nice shimmer of it all. Here's a quick little turnaround. And so you can see two different versions of the same using the same colors but different techniques. And so hope you enjoyed that. Any questions or comments, leave them below. Thank you for watching. Happy wargaming.